Welcome to the Credit Underwriting and View Findings training module presented by the USDA Single Family Housing Guaranteed Loan Program. Let's review the training objectives for the Credit Underwriting and View Findings training module. After taking this training, the user will understand how to complete and utilize the Credit Underwriting and View Findings tabs within GUS. We will specifically discuss the following aspects of the Credit Underwriting and View Findings pages. First, request credit, request preliminary underwriting, request final underwriting and submission to Rural Development, and finally, an overview of View Findings and its components, Underwriting Findings Report, Underwriting Analysis Report, and the Credit Report. The Credit Underwriting page allows users to order a new or reissued credit report for underwriting purposes and provides lenders the ability to send loan applications to USDA. The user may also perform a preliminary or final underwriting submission on this page. To navigate to the page, select the More drop-down menu and select the Credit Underwriting option. After navigating to this tab, the user will be presented with options that are available for the loan application. Request Credit Report. This allows the user to request a new or reissued credit report. Request Credit Report and Underwriting Only, Preliminary Underwriting for pre-approval. This option allows the user to request a new or reissued credit report and receive preliminary GUS underwriting recommendation simultaneously. Request Underwriting Only, Preliminary Underwriting for pre-approval. Once credit has been issued in GUS, the user can submit the application for a preliminary GUS underwriting recommendation by choosing this option. Request final underwriting and submission to Rural Development. After successfully completing credit and finalizing the GUS application, the user can perform a final underwriting submission to USDA Rural Development to request conditional commitment for loan note guarantee. Please note, this option is available to a user who has been delegated the role of representative with final submit authority by the Lender's Security Administrator, or SA. The final submission request will lock down the application from further changes. The user will still have view capability of the application. If loan application data changes are required after final submission to Rural Development, for example, the loan amount increases, interest rate increases, etc., contact the USDA Rural Development Office and request that the GUS application be released. Here, we will go over the steps necessary to order a credit report. First, select an option from the request you would like to submit dropdown. If a credit report is being ordered, select Joint if applicable. If an existing credit report is being utilized, enter the reference number, otherwise select the New checkbox. Note, when the credit report has been returned successfully, the credit status field will now show as complete. Next, select the service provider and enter the account number and password. Finally, select the Submit button in order to order the credit. Please note that GUS utilizes the Fannie Mae Credit Interface Service to retrieve credit reports. Account numbers and passwords are issued by the credit provider. The next section of the Credit Underwriting tab collects contact information. First, enter contact information for an underwriter within the lender's organization, including a contact name, phone number, and email address. Next, the user can enter up to 5 email addresses to receive the conditional commitment. These can go to any other recipients the user wants to send a conditional commitment to. On the next slide, we will cover underwriting submissions. Once the application is ready to be submitted for a preliminary or final underwriting submission, the user should take the following steps. First, select either Request Credit Report and Preliminary Underwriting, Request Underwriting Only, or Request Final Underwriting and Submission to Rural Development from the drop-down box, and then select the Submit button to submit an underwriting request. To manually downgrade an application that has already been underwritten, select the checkbox below that header and provide an explanation for the downgrade. Please note, preliminary and final submission selections will invoke the preliminary and final loan application validations respectively. These are the same validations that are invoked when the user selects the Validate Application button. Any validation failures will navigate the user to the Validate Application error page and end the underwriting attempt. The user will need to correct these errors and save until all errors have been remedied. The user will then be able to proceed with the underwriting submission. Once a loan is submitted for final underwriting, the file becomes read-only and is no longer editable. The final submission option is available to a user who has been delegated the role of representative with final submit authority by the Lender's Security Administrator, or SA. When the underwriting submission has been completed, the user will be navigated to the View Findings tab. In order to submit a loan for final submission to USDA RD, several items must be in place. Please note the following submission requirements. All borrowers must have a credit report status of complete on the credit underwriting page following a successful credit report request. The user submitting the application must be from an authorized branch of their organization to submit the loan. If the property and income eligibility, HUD total scorecard, GLS or FICO interfaces are offline, the user will be unable to submit a final underwriting submission and transfer the file to USDA Rural Development until the services return online. If a borrower is missing a borrower ID and the interface to retrieve it is offline, the user will be unable to do a final underwriting submission and transfer the file to USDA Rural Development until the site returns online. The application must receive a summary eligibility recommendation other than ineligible from Rural Development. Next, we will cover how to release a loan application back to a lender. If you are a broker or lender agent, you have the ability to release a loan application back to the lender for further processing. To release a loan application back to the lender, the user should, first, select Release Control of Application to the Lender from the Select Request you would like to submit dropdown and select the Submit button. When the confirmation submission message appears, select OK to confirm the release of the loan back to the lender or cancel to stop the process. Note, once the loan application is released, the application will no longer be editable to the broker-lender agent and will only be editable by the lender to whom the control has been released. Next, we will cover the View Findings tab. Once a loan application successfully completes an underwriting submission, the user is automatically navigated to the View Findings tab. The user should review the View Findings tab in detail to understand what was submitted to GUS for analysis and what is being required of the lender to document the loan for an approval. View Findings will also assist the lender to understand why the loan was not approved and determine whether there are steps the lender can take to get an approval. This tab shows three separate reports on the View Findings tab: the Underwriting Findings Report, Underwriting Analysis Report, and Credit Reports. The sections will be dynamically populated based on the request submitted from the Credit Underwriting tab. The information is combined with USDA loan requirements into a single tab summary. The user may scroll down the page to view all information, or they may use the sub-tab links to jump from one of the following sections to the other by selecting the Underwriting Findings Report, Underwriting Analysis Report, or Credit Report hyperlinks. Throughout the View Findings tab, the user will be presented with findings via conditions or messages that were derived off the data input into GUS by the lender. Please note, lenders can review these findings to learn how to process, restructure, and validate the loan. Lenders can quickly complete the documentation of their loan file by using the findings report messages appropriately. Each condition message has a sequential number assigned, followed by the designated message number. The designated message number is a unique number assigned to the finding. We will cover the view finding sections in more detail as we move through this module. The first section of the Underwriting Findings Report is the Underwriting Summary. This report provides the underwriting recommendation for the mortgage loan request, a detailed list of findings, and the steps necessary to complete the processing of the loan file. The first part of the underwriting summary is the underwriting recommendation, shown on this screen, which confirms through analysis of data entered and retrieved if the mortgage loan application meets credit and capacity to repay and is eligible for USDA Rural Development. The credit risk assessment, which includes credit, capacity, and collateral, will arrive at one of the underwriting recommendations described below. Except, in this case, the data entered means applicable credit capacity and collateral requirements of GUS and is eligible for delivery to a rural development office with only 3 items: RD Form 1980-21, appraisal, and FEMA flood. Except with full documentation. This recommendation means that data entered meets applicable credit, capacity, and collateral requirements of GUS and is eligible for delivery to a rural development office with full documentation. The list of required documentation is listed in the View Findings report. Refer. Loans that receive a refer recommendation require a manual underwrite of the file prior to submitting a full documentation origination file to rural development. Refer does not indicate that the file is unacceptable. Underwriters may approve the loan file upon review and confirmation that the loan application meets rural development guidelines. The GUS Underwriting Findings Report is a tremendous asset to the underwriter during file review. Refer with caution. Loans that receive a recommendation of refer with caution require a manual underwrite. These files indicate a combination of risk factors, for example, total debt ratio, credit history, etc., are present. A recommendation of refer with caution requires a manual underwrite of the origination file prior to submitting a full documentation file to rural development. Underwriters may approve the loan file upon review and confirmation that the file meets rural development guidelines, including the submission of a full documentation file to rural development. Again, the GUS Underwriting Findings Report will assist the underwriter during the manual review. Ineligible. When this recommendation is returned, the data entered does not meet applicable credit, capacity, and/or collateral requirements of GUS and is not eligible for delivery to a rural development office. Unable to determine. In this case, the system was unable to determine whether the application met credit, capacity, and/or collateral requirements of GUS. Regardless of underwriting recommendation, lenders should submit loan applications for a GUS final underwriting submission to obtain rural development conditional commitment for a loan note guarantee. The next part of the underwriting recommendation summarizes rural development's requires around property, income, loan, and borrower for eligibility. Eligible. The loan meets all Rural Development Guarantee Loan Program guidelines. The lender must ensure the accuracy of all data used to render the GUS decision. Ineligible. Loans receiving this recommendation do not meet certain rural development eligibility guidelines. Reasons for an ineligible recommendation may include, but are not limited to, input status states borrowers will not occupy the home as their primary residence, declarations. Lack of documentation noted under the permanent resident alien page. The property is located in a mapped ineligible area. Nationwide, various designations exist in areas affected by hurricanes and/or areas delegated by congressional authority. Unable to determine. One or more of the properties, income, loan, or borrower determinations were unable to be determined. Typical reasons for this recommendation include, but are not limited to, insufficient address information to determine the property is in an eligible area. New construction properties have a higher occurrence of unable to determine due to electronically unmapped areas. The public property and income website is offline. Here are some notes. Messages delivered by GUS differ from that of other automated underwriting systems. Loans that receive a recommendation of accept ineligible may still be eligible for USDA Rural Development. To achieve eligibility status, the lender must analyze the findings report and determine the reasons for ineligibility. Next, the lender can determine if these issues can be resolved within the application in a manner complying with USDA Rural Development requirements. Users are encouraged to contact their USDA Rural Development Office representative when property determinations are ineligible or unable to determine. When determined to be eligible, both recommendations can be overwritten using the approval process by Rural Development. The next page covers the mortgage information portion of the View Findings tab. The next section of the View Findings is the Mortgage Information section. Information in this section includes LTV, Loan to Value Ratio. This is populated based upon the loan amount and appraised value data input into GUS. Monthly PITI, Principal, Interest, Taxes, and Insurance. This is calculated based on the loan request and includes the annual fee for the first year. Other monthly debt. This is a sum of monthly payments owed by the borrowers. Total monthly debt. This is the sum of other monthly debt and monthly PITI. PITI ratio is calculated based on loan request. The calculated PITI appears under monthly PITI. TD ratio, or total debt. This is calculated based upon the loan amount and liabilities to be included in the underwriting recommendation. The total of all monthly debts, excluding PITI, is listed under Other Monthly Debt. The PITI and other monthly debts are combined to calculate the total monthly debt. These figures can quickly assist lenders and underwriters to confirm calculations to ensure data is true, accurate, and complete. Loan amount, sales contract price, and this is listed if the loan purpose is purchase. Balance of mortgage loans to be paid off in the transaction. This is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. Property value is listed if the loan purpose is purchase. Note rate. Loan term in months. This will default to 360. Amortization type. Loan purpose. USDA refi purpose. And this is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. And refinance program. This is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. The example shown on this page is for a purchase loan. The next slide will show a refinance example. The next section of the View Findings is the Mortgage Information section. The information in this section includes LTV, loan to value ratio. This is populated based on the loan amount and appraised value data input into GUS. Monthly PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. This is calculated based on the loan request and includes the annual fee for the first year. Other monthly debt. This is a sum of monthly payments owed by the borrowers. Total monthly debt is the sum of other monthly debt and monthly PITI. PITI ratio is calculated based on loan request. The calculated PITI appears under monthly PITI. TD, or total debt ratio. This is calculated based upon the loan amount and liabilities to be included in the underwriting recommendation. The total of all monthly debts, excluding PITI, is listed under other monthly debt. The PITI and other monthly debts are combined to calculate the total monthly debt. These figures can quickly assist lenders and underwriters to confirm calculations to ensure data is true, accurate, and complete. Loan amount is listed. Sales contract price is listed if the loan purpose is purchase. Balance of mortgage loans to be paid off in the transaction is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. Property value is listed if the loan purpose is purchase. Note rate is listed. Loan term in months will default to 360. Amortization type is listed. Loan purpose is listed. USDA refi purpose is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. And refinance program is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. The example shown on this page is for a refinance loan. The next slide covers property information. This section confirms the property address and property eligibility summary. There are 4 possible summary messages. Subject property is in an eligible area. The system will indicate that the subject property is located in an eligible area. Subject property is in an ineligible area. The system will indicate subject property is located in an ineligible area. System is unable to determine property eligibility based on current property information. The system will indicate system unable to determine property eligibility based on current property information. And finally, subject property eligibility is unknown. The system will indicate property eligibility is unknown. Followed by the property eligibility findings, if any, returned from rural development is an ordered list. Lenders should review this list for additional details. If there are no property eligibility findings returned from rural development, the system displays there were no property eligibility findings issued. Here, we will cover the Income Eligibility Information section of the View Findings tab. This section confirms data entered on the Eligibility tab and returned from the Income Eligibility Service, including county, metropolitan area or MSA, number of people in the household, is loan applicant or co-applicant age 62 or older, as yes or no, annual medical expenses, elderly household deduction, number of residents under 18 years old, disabled, or full-time students 18 years of age or greater, annual child care expenses, annual allowable child deduction, annual disability expenses, are there any disabled persons living in the household, as yes or no, total household income, allowable adjustments, adjusted household income, and finally, maximum allowable adjusted household income. At the bottom of the section are the income eligibility determination summary and findings. An income eligibility determination message will be listed at the top of the text box, followed by findings determined by rural development if applicable. If the application's income eligibility determination is eligible, the system displays applicant is eligible based on income criteria. If the application's income eligibility determination is ineligible, the system displays applicant is ineligible based on income criteria. If the application's income eligibility determination is unable to determine, the system displays system unable to determine applicant income eligibility. If the value is unknown, the system displays applicant income eligibility is unknown. Note: if the income eligibility site is temporarily unavailable for a preliminary underwriting submission, GUS will default to the underwriting findings report without a recommendation. A new preliminary underwriting submission must be attempted when the eligibility website returns online. Review the income eligibility findings for additional details. The loan applicant eligibility section of GUS will display program eligibility findings specific to individual applicants and the loan parameters as a whole. Lenders should review this section carefully as it may list specific eligibility factors identified by GUS that directly contributed to the underwriting recommendation message portion regarding eligibility, eligible, ineligible, or unable to determine. Results will vary per applicant. Review each finding. The first text box in this section includes the loan eligibility findings, if any, returned from rural development, as well as the overall loan eligibility recommendation. The system will display unknown, eligible, ineligible, or unable to determine for loan eligibility recommendation. If no findings were issued, the system populates there were no loan eligibility findings issued. Subsequent text boxes in this section include borrower eligibility findings, if any, returned from rural development, as well as the CAVERS number and borrower eligibility recommendation. The system will display borrower eligibility is, followed by unknown, eligible, ineligible, or unable to determine for borrower eligibility recommendation. If no findings were issued, the system populates there is no eligibility finding for the borrower's name, instead of generating an ordered list. These borrowers are listed in the order they are entered on the borrower page. The Loan Applicant Risk section of GUS will display program eligibility risks specific to individual applicants and the loan parameters as a whole. Lenders should review this section carefully as it may list specific risk factors identified by GUS that directly contributed to the underwriting recommendation. Results will vary per applicant. Review each finding. The first text box in this section includes the loan risk findings, if any, returned from rural development. If no findings were issued, the system populates there were no loan risk findings issued. Subsequent text boxes in this section include borrower risk findings, if any, returned from rural development. If no findings were issued, the system populates there is no risk finding for the borrower's name. These borrowers are listed in the order they are entered on the borrower page. The lender's required conditions includes any items identified during the loan evaluation analysis performed by GUS regarding the credit, capacity, and collateral of the loan application. Lenders should carefully review each finding requirement to ensure true, accurate, and complete data. Each condition should be addressed in the lender's permanent loan file. If there are no lender-required conditions for a given stage, then the system displays there are no lender-required conditions prior to stage, where stage is final submission, conditional commitment, closing, or guarantee. The Borrower-Co-Borrower GUS-GLS comparison section of the View Findings tab notes any differences between the borrower data entered on the application and data from existing applications in GLS. The section notes differences between specific borrower attribute in a table that includes the borrower's name in the borrower element, relevant application page in GUS page association, and data element name in name of attributes, application value data in GUS data, and GLS value in GLS data. The following data elements are included in the comparison. Number of people in household. Are there any disabled persons living in the household? First name, middle name, last name, suffix, date of birth, citizenship, marital status, number of dependents. Did you or your deceased spouse ever serve or are currently serving in the United States Armed Forces? Street address, property address for the subject property of the loan. Unit number, property address for the subject property of the loan. City, property address for the subject property of the loan. State, property address for the subject property of the loan. Zip code, property address for the subject property of the loan. Have you ever declared bankruptcy within the last 7 years? Bankruptcy explanation if the borrower has previously declared bankruptcy. Gender, race, and ethnicity information from the demographic information page. System for Award Management, SAM, indicates a party to the transaction is debarred from business with the federal government. Do you have a relationship with any rural development employee? And qualification status for U.S. non-citizens. Note, if no discrepancies exist between evaluated data elements, then this section is not displayed on the View Findings page. The Rural Development's Required Conditions section of the View Findings tab specifically states what conditions that USDA Rural Development requires prior to each of the following stages: final submission, conditional commitment, closing, and guarantee. Lenders should carefully review each finding requirement to ensure true, accurate, and complete data. Each condition should be addressed in the lender's permanent loan file. If there are no rural development required conditions prior for a given stage, then the system displays there are no USDA required conditions prior to the stage, where the stage is final submission, conditional commitment, closing, or guarantee. This section concludes the GUS Underwriting Findings Report. Next, we will cover the GUS Underwriting Analysis Report. The GUS Underwriting Analysis Report contains key information used in determining the recommendation, including borrower, property, and loan information. This section is the first under the GUS Underwriting Analysis Report and reviews property-related data entered into the loan application. Information in this section includes: property address is listed, property value is listed, sales contract price is listed if the loan purpose is purchase, balance of mortgage loans to be paid off in the transaction. This is listed if the loan purpose is refinance. Purchase is listed. Construction convertible perm is listed if the loan purpose is purchase. Single closing to closing is listed if the loan purpose is purchase and construction convertible perm is yes. Renovation is listed if the loan purpose is purchase. Type of construction is listed. Estate will be held in is listed. New construction requirements met is listed if the loan purpose is purchase and the purchase is new. Existing construction requirements met is listed if the loan purpose is purchase and the purchase is existing. And finally, structure type is listed. The repayment income details portion of the GUS underwriting analysis report are listed by borrower and may vary from eligibility income. Base, overtime, bonus, commission, military entitlements, other income, self-employed income, monthly income or loss, and income from other sources are from the borrower screen. Net rental income is the sum of positive rental income from the real estate field for a given borrower. The section provides a grand total at the bottom of the section and a subtotal, total repayment income per borrower. Borrowers are listed in the order they are entered on the borrower screen. The monthly expenses section of the GUS underwriting analysis report outlines the total housing expenses proposed and other expenses listed on the application. Each of these sections are subtotaled at the end of the section. Please note, the house expenses proposed section is pulled from the lender loan information section. Other expenses totals monthly payments from the assets and liabilities and real estate sections. Credit cards, other debts, and leases that you owe is the sum of monthly payments under liabilities, credit cards, other debts, and leases that you owe, not marked omit or to be paid off at or before closing on the assets and liabilities page. Other liabilities and expenses is the sum of monthly payments under other liabilities and expenses on the assets and liabilities page. Mortgage loans is the sum of monthly mortgage payments not marked as omit or to be paid off at or before closing, associated with properties on the real estate page where the status is pending sale, sold, as well as retained properties with an intended occupancy of primary residence or second home. Negative net rental is the sum as a positive number of the negative net rental income from properties on the real estate page. Next, we will cover the funds to close and post-closing cash reserves sections of the GUS underwriting analysis report portion of the View Findings tab. The funds to close section will calculate the funds needed to close as well as the funds available entered into GUS. Cash from the borrower or cash to the borrower is populated from Lender Loan Information tab. Only one of these two is displayed based on whether the cash is required from or owed to the borrower at closing. Mortgage debt to be paid by closing is calculated from the real estate section. Total funds required calculates the amount of funds needed at closing based upon the data entered on the loan application. Funds available is the sum of eligible assets entered into the loan application. The post-closing cash reserve section provides details related to the cash reserves. Cash reserves represents the borrower's available cash after closing. Months of cash reserves is the amount of cash reserves available divided by the proposed PITI, including annual fee for the first year. Cash reserves can represent a strong compensating factor in the credit and risk evaluation by GUS. The GUS credit report summary section is the third and final section of the View Findings tab and summarizes key statistics from the issued credit report. This section provides a summary of and a link to each credit report that was returned for the request. This is the only section that will populate if an application has not been submitted for underwriting. Credit report status lists the status of the credit report. Complete indicates a complete credit report is associated with the loan application of the borrowers. Error indicates that an error occurred in the credit request. A description of the error is provided. Out of date indicates the borrower information has been modified since the last underwriting request or it was issued prior to 120 days, thereby requiring a new credit request. Updating indicates that the application is still processing a borrower's credit status. Unknown indicates that a borrower has not had a credit report requested. Provider name, number of request. Credit report type is broken down into two parts. First, the system indicates if the associated credit report is a joint or individual credit report, then if it is a new credit report or reissued credit report. Reference number lists the credit file number associated with the request. If the credit report is later reissued, the reference number of the initial credit report will be utilized to reissue the report. Date issued lists the date of the credit report. And finally, date last updated displays an updated date if any changes have been made to the credit report. Select the Click to View Print Credit Report hyperlink to access the retrieved credit report. The Credit Report Summary section provides the credit scores utilized in the GUS recommendation and the associated credit repository for each borrower. These values are returned by the HUD service. Select the Print button to print the entire View Findings section. Note, a printed copy of the final findings is required in the lender's permanent record. And with that, this concludes the Credit Underwriting and View Findings module.